A retired Navy SEAL came back to keep one simple promise. He had left his loyal German Shepherd K9 in safe hands, believing she would be waiting. But when he returned, the care center was empty, and her name had vanished from the records. A wealthy family claimed she was gone, yet something in their polished story felt wrong. Then, on a snowy evening behind a small-town tavern, he saw a starving stray with a torn ear. One quiet signal, one old name, and the dog looked back as if a buried promise had finally found her. Watch until the end, then tell us where you're watching from. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and create more heartfelt stories. Rowan Bell came back to Vermont on a morning so white it seemed the world had been erased and redrawn in silence. Snow lay over White Pine Hollow in smooth, unbroken sheets, softening the roofs, burying the fences, making even the old road signs look forgiven. The pines stood dark against the brightness, their branches bowed beneath winter's quiet weight. Farther off, the Green Mountains rose behind a pale veil of cloud, like old witnesses who had seen too many promises made beneath softer skies. Rowan drove with both hands on the wheel. He had not planned to grip it so tightly. He had told himself the drive would be simple. One last errand before the rest of his life began. A few signatures? A reunion? A German shepherd's black and gold head lifting at the sound of his voice. Mara pressing her forehead against his knee the way she used to after a long mission, not asking where he had been, only confirming he had returned. That was how he had carried the thought for months. Not as hope. Hope was too fragile a word. As duty. Rowan Bell was 51 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of strength that had been built by cold mornings, long marches, and years of obeying orders no civilian would ever fully understand. His face was angular, clean-shaven, weathered by wind and loss rather than age alone. The undercut he still kept from habit was neat, dark brown, mixed with silver at the temples. His eyes, gray-blue and steady, rarely gave away the first thing he felt. That morning, they gave away nothing. He wore an olive-drab combat shirt beneath a faded field jacket, the sleeves patterned in camouflage with dark horizontal bands across the upper arms. The clothes were not a costume to him. They were simply what his hands reached for when the day required steadiness. On the passenger seat lay an old folder. Inside it were Mara's transfer papers, a temporary care agreement, and the metal record tag he had kept with him through recovery and discharge processing. The tag was scratched, cold, and plain. Mara Rowan Bell, return upon discharge clearance. He had read those words so many times they had become less like text and more like scripture. He had not abandoned her. That was what he reminded himself as the road narrowed and the sign for Hearthline Canine Care appeared through the trees. He had not left Mara because he wanted to. After his final deployment, after the doctors and evaluations and discharge boards, he had needed time to become safe enough for civilian life again. Mara had needed warmth, veterinary care, routine. Hearthline had promised that. A temporary place, a bridge. A bridge was not supposed to become a grave. Rowan slowed the truck. At first, his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. The wooden sign still hung near the entrance, but one chain had rusted loose, leaving it tilted under a cap of snow. The driveway had not been plowed. No tire tracks cut through the fresh white. No boot prints crossed the yard. The wire fences around the exercise runs were half buried, their gates hanging open just enough to move in the wind. There should have been barking. Even in winter, even early, a kennel had a heartbeat. Paws against concrete, water bowls ringing, a worker calling a name, a dog answering before any person did. There was nothing. Rowan parked outside the gate and stepped down into snow deep enough to swallow the soles of his boots. The cold came up through the ground as if the earth itself had been waiting to remind him he was late. He stood still. A lesser silence might have comforted a man. This one accused him. He walked toward the office, each step crunching too loudly. Through the front window he saw a desk, a toppled plastic chair, a corkboard stripped nearly bare. A few curled papers clung to one corner. The door was locked. Frost feathered the inside edge of the glass. Rowan tried the handle once, then again, though he already knew. "Mara?" he said. The name disappeared into the yard. There was an old feeding shed to the left, and beyond it, the kennel row. Rowan moved through each space like a man searching the ruins of a chapel after the gods had been carried away. Empty bowls, blankets gone stiff with cold, a cracked rubber ball frozen half into the snow near one run. In the last kennel, a strip of black and tan fur clung to the chain-link fence. His hand went to it before he could stop himself. For one foolish second, his chest tightened with recognition. But it was only fur. Winter had a cruel way of making relics look like messages. He took the metal tag from his pocket and closed his fist around it until the edge bit into his palm. No one had called him. No one had written in a way that reached him. No one had told him that the place holding the last living piece of his old life had vanished. By noon, Rowan had gone through half the town and learned how little people could say when silence was more profitable than honesty. At the gas station, a man with red ears and a wool cap told him Hearthline had gone under. He said it while restocking windshield fluid, eyes fixed on the bottles as if they required great concentration. "Dogs?" Rowan asked. "Adopted out, I heard." "By who?" The man shrugged too quickly. "Different folks." At the general store, a woman behind the register pretended to search her memory, then found only fog. She said the center had debt, maybe a lawsuit, maybe bad management. Shame, really. Good place once. When Rowan said Mara's name, the woman's mouth closed. It was not fear exactly. It was the look people wore when a buried thing shifted under the floorboards and everyone in the room hoped someone else would deal with it. By mid-afternoon, he had a name, Vivian Rook. The former manager of Hearthline lived 2 miles beyond town, where the paved road gave up and the forest took over. Her house was small, old, and set back beneath heavy pines. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, tired ribbon. Snow covered the porch steps, except for one narrow path cleared by hand. Vivian opened the door before Rowan knocked a second time. She was 58, maybe, though grief and winter had a way of adding years without asking permission. Her hair was brown-gray, tied low and badly, as if neatness had become an old luxury. She wore a thick gray sweater beneath a worn barn coat, and her hands were rough, cracked, the hands of someone who had held leashes, medicine bottles, and too many final decisions. "I'm not buying anything," she said. "Rowan Bell." The name struck her before she could hide it. He saw the small change in her face. Not surprise. Recognition. Worse than recognition. "I'm looking for Mara." Vivian's hand tightened on the doorframe. Behind her, the house smelled of old paper, wood smoke, and dry dog food, though no dog appeared. Rowan noticed that. Of course he noticed. Men like him and dogs like Mara had survived because noticing had once meant breathing another day. Vivian looked past him at the trees, as though some answer might be standing there in the snow. "You should come in," she said at last. The inside of the house was warmer than it looked, but not kinder. Boxes lined one wall, file folders sat stacked on a table beside a cold mug of tea. A faded Hearthline calendar still hung near the kitchen doorway, stopped on a month that had ended long ago. Rowan did not sit. Vivian did. That told him enough. "I came as soon as I was cleared," he said. "The agreement said she was to be returned to me." "I know what it said." Rowan placed the metal tag on the table. It made a small sound against the wood. Vivian looked at it as if it had teeth. For a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, wind pushed snow against the window in soft, dry taps. Rowan had endured interrogation rooms, command briefings, memorial services. Still, waiting for this woman to speak felt harder than it should have. Perhaps because battle had rules, even when it pretended not to. This was different. This was the slow violence of paperwork, debt, good intentions, and closed offices. Vivian finally touched the tag with one finger. "I tried to reach you." Rowan said nothing. "The military address we had was inactive. The email bounced back. I sent 2 letters to the last forwarding contact. One came back, one didn't." Her voice stayed controlled, but only barely. By then, the center was already falling apart. What happened? Vivian let out a breath that had been living in her chest for months. Money first, then lawyers, then donors who had promised help and disappeared when the numbers stopped looking noble. She rubbed at a crack near her thumbnail. We had dogs needing medication, staff who hadn't been paid, a heating bill I couldn't cover, then an administrative complaint over licensing renewals. One thing became 5. 5 became a wall. Mara was not yours to place. No. Vivian's eyes lifted, pale blue, tired, honest enough to hurt. She wasn't. The anger came then, quiet and clean. Rowan felt it move through him like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. But Vivian did not defend herself, and that left the anger nowhere easy to go. "The Whitcomb family stepped in," she said. "Sterling Whitcomb. He owns the lodge up on the ridge. Whitcomb Crest. He offered to settle part of the debt if we transferred several dogs into private adoption. He said they'd be cared for. Warm rooms, space, veterinary access. He made it sound like salvation." Rowan stared at her. "Mara?" Vivian nodded once. She was one of them. She was under return hold. "I know." "Then why?" The question hit the room like a dropped stone. Vivian looked older when she answered. "Because I had 12 dogs in a building I couldn't afford to heat, 2 staff members crying in the office, and a county officer telling me if I didn't move them within 48 hours, they might be separated across facilities out of state." Her voice cracked, but did not rise. "Because Sterling Whitcomb came with paperwork that looked clean and a promise that sounded better than panic. Because I made the least terrible choice I could see." Rowan wanted to hate her. For a moment, he tried. It would have been easier if she had been cruel. Easier if greed had sat across from him wearing a human face. But Vivian Rook looked like a woman who had spent every night since then listening to kennel doors close in her sleep. "That doesn't make it right," Rowan said. "No," she whispered. "It doesn't." His hand closed around the tag again. In his mind, Mara was not a file, not a transfer, not a retired military dog with placement needs. She was the warm weight against his leg in freezing desert nights. She was the low warning before the world went wrong. She was the creature who had once refused to leave him when smoke filled a doorway and every human voice in his earpiece had become noise. He had trusted Hearthline with her because he had believed there were places built for promises. Now he was learning that even promises could be sold when the heat bill came due. Vivian rose slowly and crossed to a box near the wall. She searched through folders with hands that trembled only when they touched Mara's file. At last, she pulled out a copy of the transfer document and placed it before him. Sterling Whitcomb's signature sat near the bottom. Elegant, confident, black ink. An address was printed beneath it. Whitcomb Crest Lodge. The name seemed too polished to belong in the same world as an empty kennel and a frozen ball in the snow. "She was alive when she left here," Vivian said. Rowan looked up sharply. Vivian swallowed. She was confused, waiting, I think. She kept looking at the road whenever a truck came in. The older woman's face tightened. "I told myself you would find her eventually, that Whitcomb would do what he promised, that one wrong signature could be corrected later. And did you check? The question was not loud. That made it worse. Vivian shut her eyes for 1 second. I called twice. They said she was settling. Then they stopped returning calls. Rowan folded the document and put it inside his jacket. At the door, Vivian spoke again. Mr. Bell. He paused without turning. If you find her, her voice thinned. Don't bring her back here to show me what I did. Rowan stood with one hand on the knob. Outside, the snow had begun again, fine and bright, falling through the trees like ash from some clean white fire. I'm not looking for her to punish you, he said. Then why? For the first time that day, his face changed, only slightly, a tightening near the eyes, a grief too disciplined to beg for attention. Because I told her I'd come back. He left Vivian Rook in her warm little house with its dead calendar and its boxes of names. The road up to Whitcomb Crest Lodge climbed above town, through pines heavy with fresh snow. As Rowan drove, the valley fell away behind him, small houses and shop roofs glowing under the early evening light. White Pine Hollow looked peaceful from above. Most places did if you stood far enough away from what they had done. Then the trees opened. Whitcomb Crest stood on the ridge like a winter palace built by men who believed beauty could absolve anything. Warm lights shone from tall windows. Smoke rose from stone chimneys. Expensive vehicles lined the cleared drive. A wreath large enough to cover a kennel door hung above the main entrance. Beyond the iron gate, staff moved beneath lanterns, carrying luggage, smiling at guests who had come to purchase silence, scenery, and the feeling of being good. Rowan stopped before the gate. He did not get out at once. For a long moment, he sat with the transfer paper in his jacket and Mara's tag in his palm. Somewhere beyond those lit windows, she had been brought as a symbol, a story for donors, a heroic animal wrapped in someone else's ribbon. Perhaps she was warm. Perhaps she was fed. Perhaps she had forgotten the sound of his voice. The last thought hurt most, because love did not become smaller just because it arrived late. Rowan opened the truck door. Cold air rushed in. He stepped into the snow and looked up at the lodge, at all that polished wood and golden glass, and felt something inside him settle into place. Not rage. Rage was too loud for this moment. Resolve. He had not come to reclaim property. He had come for a friend, and if the whole town had learned to bury her name beneath the snow, then he would start digging at the gate. Sterling Whitcomb did not keep Rowan waiting long. That bothered Rowan more than if he had. Men who wanted to hide something often delayed, misplaced, apologized, sent someone else to speak in their place. Sterling did none of that. He received Rowan in the grand sitting room of Whitcomb Crest Lodge as if the visit had been expected, measured, and already folded into the day's schedule. The room was warm enough to make winter feel like a rumor. A stone fireplace burned along the far wall, throwing gold light across polished beams, leather chairs, and framed photographs arranged with the patience of a man who understood the value of being seen correctly. Sterling shaking hands with veterans. Sterling beside a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sterling at a charity gala, one hand placed over his heart while an American flag hung behind him like a borrowed halo. And there, near the center of the wall, was Mara. Rowan saw her before Sterling spoke. The photograph had been taken in the lodge's main hall. Mara stood beside Sterling, black and gold coat brushed until it shone, ears alert, body still in that trained way that always made civilians mistake discipline for peace. Around her neck was a red ribbon with a small gold Whitcomb crest pinned to it. The caption below the frame read, "Liberty Bell finds her forever home." For a moment, Rowan forgot the warmth of the room, forgot Sterling's soft greeting, forgot the fire. He only saw that false name. Sterling Whitcomb moved toward him with the smooth confidence of a man who had never had to rush because rooms usually turned to meet him. He was 54, tall, silver-haired, and carefully handsome, dressed in a dark wool jacket over a cream turtleneck. His smile was gentle without being intimate. "Mr. Bell," Sterling said, extending a hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under such troubling circumstances." Rowan looked at the hand, then shook it. Sterling's grip was warm, dry, controlled. "I came for Mara." The smile softened by one careful degree. "Yes," Vivian called ahead. "I assumed that was why." Rowan did not sit when Sterling gestured toward the chairs. He remained standing, boots still damp from snow, his olive combat shirt visible beneath the open field jacket. The lodge around him seemed designed to absorb men like him and make them look out of place. Sterling sat anyway. That, too, was strategy. "I wish," Sterling said, lowering his eyes for the proper length of time, "that I had better news." Rowan felt the room narrow. "She isn't here?" Sterling folded his hands. A signet ring caught the firelight. "No." "Where is she?" Sterling breathed out slowly, as if preparing to injure them both. "Mara, Liberty Bell, as our guest knew her, became ill several months ago. It was sudden at first, then worse. We brought in care. We did what we could." Rowan did not blink. "She died?" Sterling nodded. The fire made a soft cracking sound. Rowan had heard lies before. Most were nervous creatures, twitching under their own skin. Sterling's lie was different. It wore a good coat. It had practiced posture. It knew which words to avoid and which emotions to display near the eyes. "When?" Rowan asked. "Early autumn." "What was the diagnosis?" Sterling's expression did not change, but something behind it adjusted. "Degenerative complications. She had been through a great deal before she came to us." "What vet?" "Our staff handled those records. I can have someone look." "Where is she buried?" A pause, small but real. Sterling glanced toward the fire, then back. "On private grounds? A peaceful place. She deserved that." "Where?" "I'm not sure of the exact marker. The grounds are extensive." Rowan let the answer sit between them. On the wall, Mara stared out from the photograph with a stillness he knew too well. Her body was straight, but her weight was not settled. Her front paws were aligned for command, yet her eyes were not on the camera. They were looking just beyond it, focused on something out of frame. Not relaxed. Waiting. "She hated ribbons," Rowan said. Sterling's brows lifted faintly. "I'm sorry?" "Mara hated anything tied around her neck unless it was working gear. If you put something loose there, she'd keep her chin low until it came off." Sterling's smile did not disappear, but it lost warmth. "She adjusted remarkably well here. Dogs often surprise us when given comfort." Rowan turned from the photograph. "Her left hind leg, did it ever bother her?" "I don't recall anything significant." "It did in cold weather." "Perhaps our staff—" Her right ear had a V-shaped tear near the edge. Sterling gave a sympathetic tilt of the head. "Mr. Bell, I understand grief can sharpen details." Rowan stepped closer to the mantel, where a smaller photograph showed Sterling kneeling beside Mara at what looked like a fundraiser. Guests in evening clothes smiled behind them. Mara's body was still again. Her eyes were turned toward the exit. "She wasn't grief to me," Rowan said quietly. "She was my responsibility." The word changed something in the room. Responsibility did not belong among the staged photographs. It had too much mud on its boots. Sterling rose. "Mr. Bell, I truly am sorry. I can arrange to send you what memorabilia we still have. Her ribbon, perhaps. A copy of the commemorative program from the fundraiser." Rowan looked at him then. "Her military collar, her tag, her medical file." Sterling's hand rested on the back of a leather chair. "I'll have my office search for them." "Today?" "I'm afraid I can't promise that." "You adopted a dog under a return hold. You changed her name. You used her image. Now you're telling me she died, but you can't tell me where, how, under whose care, or what happened to her gear." Sterling's face became very still, not angry, emptier than anger. "I would be careful," he said softly, "about suggesting misconduct without evidence." There it was, the velvet slipping just enough to show the blade beneath. Before Rowan could answer, movement stirred in the hallway beyond the room. A woman stood there, half-shadowed beside a carved doorway. She was slender, wrapped in a pale gray wool dress and a long cardigan, her ash-blonde hair pinned low as if she had dressed carefully for a life she did not quite occupy. Her eyes met Rowan's only for a second. Maribel Whitcomb. He knew it before Sterling turned. "Maribel," Sterling said, and the name came out gently enough to pass for affection if no one listened too closely. "We're in a private conversation." Her hand moved to the small silver pendant at her throat. "I was only looking for the mail." "In the sitting room?" She looked down. "No, of course not." Rowan watched her retreat, not because she had answers, because she looked like a person who had kept them too long. Sterling turned back with a sigh meant to restore civility. "My sister has always been sensitive where animals are concerned." Rowan placed Mara's metal tag on the polished side table. The sound was small, but it cut through the room better than shouting. "If she's dead," he said, "you won't mind proving it." Sterling looked at the tag. For the first time, his expression almost slipped. Almost. "I'll be in touch," he said. Rowan took the tag back and left before the room could pretend to be kind again. Outside, the cold struck him cleanly across the face. He welcomed it. The lodge had smelled of cedar smoke, expensive soap, and old money. The air beyond the door smelled like snow and pine sap and distance. It was honest, at least. He drove down from Whitcomb Crest with no dog, no proof, and a lie sitting beside him in the passenger seat like a second man. By the time he reached town, dusk had begun to gather blue in the alleys. White Pine Hollow looked different from the ridge. Up close, it was not a postcard. It was a place patched together by winter labor, salt-streaked storefronts, shoveled sidewalks, smoke from chimneys, old trucks with cracked taillights, people carrying groceries with their heads down against the wind. A town could look innocent from above because distance was the oldest liar of all. Rowan took a room behind Maeve Larkin's diner. Maeve was 64, short, round-shouldered, and sharp-eyed, with silver curls and a coffee pot that seemed permanently attached to one hand. She looked at Rowan's single duffel, then at his boots, then at his face. "You staying one night or making trouble by the week?" "Week, maybe." "Trouble, then." "Maybe." She snorted. "Room's cold for the first hour. Pipes complain. So do I. Don't take either personally." The room was small and smelled of soap, old wood, and frying oil from the kitchen below. It had a narrow bed, a chip dresser, and a window facing the alley behind the diner. Maeve had already put 2 extra blankets on the chair before he arrived, though when he noticed them, she said, "Don't flatter yourself. I overcharge for heat." The next morning, Rowan found work at Abel Crow's snowmobile repair garage. Abel did not ask for a resume. He watched Rowan lift a jammed track assembly, studied the way he handled weight without showing off, and grunted. "You know machines?" "Enough to know when they're lying." Abel's beard twitched. It might have been approval. He was 63, wide as an old bear, with oil on his sleeves and a gray knit cap pulled low over hair that had surrendered to weather years ago. His garage smelled of gasoline, rubber, metal filings, and burnt coffee strong enough to qualify as a legal dispute. "You can start by convincing that Arctic cat in Bay 2 it isn't dead," Abel said. "It's been faking since Tuesday." Work gave Rowan a reason to stay. More than that, it gave people a reason to speak near him without deciding to speak to him. In White Pine Hollow, truth traveled best when it thought no one was watching. Over the next few days, Rowan learned that Whitcomb Crest paid for the town's winter lights. sponsored the veterans' breakfast, covered emergency lodging when storms closed the highway, bought uniforms for the high school years ago, though no one mentioned that anymore because gratitude, like debt, lasted longer in small places than it should. Abel put it plainly one afternoon while tightening a belt on a snow machine. Sterling doesn't threaten folks. Rowan looked up from a tool tray. Abel spat a toothpick into the trash and reached for another. He just stops helping. Around here, that's worse. A threat gives you something to hate. Losing a contract gives you a mortgage problem. Rowan said, "You believe him about Mara?" Abel did not answer right away. The garage door was open halfway and snow drifted in thin lines across the concrete. "I believe rich men bury fewer things than poor men," Abel said. "But they own better shovels." That evening, Maeve brought Rowan a stack of old local newspapers without asking why he wanted them. "Found these in storage," she said, dropping them on his table in the diner. "Don't spill soup on 2018. That was a good year for coupons." In the papers, Rowan found Mara's second life, not as Mara, as Liberty Bell. There she stood beside Sterling under banners and chandeliers, at charity dinners, beside wreaths, near donors in velvet dresses and men with polished shoes. The campaign line appeared more than once. "A hero dog finds home." The photos changed slightly, but Mara's eyes did not. In every picture, she looked past the crowd. Rowan set the last clipping down and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. It would have been easier if Sterling had beaten her. Easier to understand, easier to hate. But this was something colder. Mara had been polished, renamed, displayed, and translated into a story that made people feel generous. Then she had vanished from the photographs. No memorial notice, no obituary post, no farewell. Just absence where a living creature had been useful. Late in the week, after a long shift at Abel's garage, Rowan walked back through town under a heavy fall of snow. The sky had turned iron blue, and the street lamps glowed in soft circles above the sidewalks. He was tired in the body, but not in the mind. The mind had become a room with Sterling's lie pacing inside it. As he passed the copper antler, a burst of yellow light spilled from the rear door into the alley. Then came a man's voice. "Get out! Go on!" Something metal clattered. Rowan stopped. Behind the tavern, Doyle Keene stood in the doorway with an apron tied over his thick stomach, one hand gripping a trash lid. He was red-faced, heavy-jawed, and angry in the lazy way of men who preferred targets that could not answer back. Near the bins, half hidden by blowing snow, stood a German shepherd, too thin, filthy. Black and gold coat matted with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath fur, head low, ears angled back. The dog did not bark, did not run. It only watched the food scraps near the doorway with the exhausted calculation of an animal deciding whether hunger was worth another blow. "Move!" Doyle shouted, lifting the lid. The dog flinched. Rowan's world went quiet. Not silent. Quiet. The way it had gone quiet in places where every sense sharpened and the body understood before thought was ready. The dog turned its head. Under the tavern light, Rowan saw the right ear, a small V-shaped tear along the edge. His breath stopped halfway in his chest. The animal shifted weight, and the left hind leg placed a fraction wrong, careful on the snow. Not a limp exactly, a memory in the body. Rowan did not run. Some part of him wanted to cross the alley and gather what was left of her before the world could take another piece. But hunger and fear had rebuilt Mara into a country with guarded borders. A man did not invade a country just because he loved what lived inside it. He lowered himself slowly into the snow. Doyle said something behind him, but Rowan did not hear it. He took off one glove. The cold bit his fingers immediately. He placed his bare palm open against the snow, not reaching, not calling command, not demanding recognition. The old signal. Safe ground. No pressure. The German shepherd froze, her amber-brown eyes fixed on his hand, then on his face. Rowan's throat tightened so hard the name almost could not pass through. Mara. The dog did not come, but she did not leave. And in the narrow alley behind a cheap tavern, with snow falling between them like the ash of every broken promise, Rowan Bell understood that Sterling Whitcomb had lied about her death, because the truth was worse. Mara hadn't died. She had been made unwanted. Mara did not come to him. For a few seconds, Rowan stood in the alley behind the copper antler, with his bare palm pressed into the snow, feeling the cold climb through his skin and into the bones of his hand. The tavern door behind him hung open, spilling yellow light across garbage bins, broken beer crates, and the thin, trembling shape of the German shepherd who had once slept beside his cot in places where sleep was a luxury men borrowed from danger. Mara stared at him, not with joy, not even with certainty. Her lips lifted enough to show teeth. Her body crouched low, ribs faint under the ruined black and gold coat, tail tucked but not limp. There was still pride in her. Starved, filthy, half-frozen pride. The kind that refused to die simply because the world had stopped calling it by its name. "Mara," Rowan said again, softer this time. Doyle Keene, the tavern owner, stepped out behind him with a trash lid still in one hand. "You know that thing?" Rowan did not look back. "Put the lid down." Doyle gave a humorless laugh. He was a thick man with a red face and the sour smell of spilled beer soaked into his apron. "That mutt's been digging through my trash for 3 nights. Scared off 2 customers yesterday." "Put it down," Rowan said. Something in his voice made Doyle hesitate. The lid lowered slowly, though Doyle muttered while doing it, as if surrendering to common decency required a formal complaint. Mara's eyes flicked toward the movement. Her muscles tightened. Rowan stayed still. He did not reach for her. He did not use the old command tone. Commands belonged to a life where Mara had known what came after obedience: food, rest, Rowan's hand on her shoulder, a place in the dark beside someone who would not sell her name. Whatever had happened since then had broken the bridge between command and safety. So he gave her the one thing no one at Whitcomb Crest had likely given her: time. Snow collected on his sleeve. His fingers began to ache. The cold made his palm burn where it touched the ground. Mara took one step, then stopped. Her nose moved, testing the air. Beneath the rot of garbage and tavern grease, beneath the snow and old wood smoke, there must have been something left of him. Gun oil long washed from his skin, field soap, wool, the faint leather of his glove. Or maybe memory had its own scent, buried deep enough that pain could not fully kill it. Rowan made a low sound in his throat. Not a word, not a whistle. Just the small, steady note he had once used when the world around them was too loud for language. Mara flinched. Then her ears shifted. The right one, torn in a little V along the edge, rose halfway before folding back. Her left hind leg trembled as she leaned forward. One more step, then another. She came like a creature walking across a frozen lake, knowing the ice might betray her at any second. When she reached his hand, she did not touch it at first. She hovered above his palm, breathing hard. Rowan felt each warm, ragged breath against his skin. Then her nose brushed his knuckles. A sound came out of her, so small that Doyle's muttering nearly swallowed it. It was not a whine, not quite. It sounded like the first crack in a locked door. Rowan closed his eyes for 1 second. He had imagined this moment in too many merciful ways. Mara leaping up, paws on his chest. Mara barking once, offended that he had taken so long. Mara forgiving him with the effortless generosity people like to assign to dogs because it made human failures easier to bear. But Mara did not forgive him. Not yet. She only remembered him. And somehow, that was more sacred. "I'm here," he whispered. "I know I'm late." When he opened his eyes, Mara was still standing in front of him, close enough to touch, too far to claim. A gust of wind swept snow through the alley. Mara shivered violently, her thin body folding inward against the cold. That decided what Rowan had not wanted to force. He took off his field jacket slowly. Mara stiffened. "Easy?" He did not lay it over her. He placed it on the snow between them, then shifted back. The inside of the jacket held his warmth, his scent. Mara stared at it as if it might turn into a trap. Then hunger, cold, memory, or exhaustion made the choice for her. She stepped onto the jacket with her front paws and lowered her head. Rowan did not move until her legs gave. She sank down suddenly, not collapsing fully, but losing the argument with her body. Rowan slid forward, slow as sunrise over ice, and gathered the edges of the jacket around her without closing his arms too tightly. Mara growled once. It was weak, but real. "Fair," he murmured. Doyle shifted behind him. "You taking her, then?" Rowan lifted Mara carefully. She was lighter than she had any right to be. That weight, or the lack of it, struck him harder than if someone had thrown a fist into his ribs. "Yes," he said. Doyle scratched his jaw. "If she bites someone, don't say I didn't." Rowan turned his head just enough. Doyle stopped. Maeve Larkin met him at the back stairs of the diner 10 minutes later, wearing a cardigan over her night blouse and an expression that suggested the universe had personally inconvenienced her. Her silver curls stuck out in defiance of both gravity and hospitality. "I told you no dogs in the rooms," she said. Mara's head hung against Rowan's chest, eyes half open. Maeve looked at the dog, then at Rowan. Then she stepped aside. "I also told my first husband he was handsome," she muttered. "People say all kinds of foolish things before supper." The room above the diner was too small for grief and a wounded shepherd, but it accepted both. Rowan laid Mara on the folded blankets near the radiator, not close enough to corner her against the wall, not far enough to leave her exposed. Her eyes tracked every movement. Even exhausted, she counted exits. Door, window, Rowan, hallway. Maeve brought water in a metal bowl. The faint ring of it against the floor made Mara jerk so hard she nearly struck the dresser. Rowan raised one hand, palm down. "Leave it there." Maeve froze, understanding at once. For all her sharp tongue, she had the rare sense not to smother a frightened thing with kindness. "She's in bad shape," Maeve said quietly. "I know." "You need Lenora." "I need a phone." Maeve was already reaching into her apron pocket for one. "And I need you not bleeding on my floor if that poor girl decides your face is the next thing she doesn't trust." Dr. Lenora Pike arrived 25 minutes later with a battered brown medical bag, snow in her hair, and no wasted sympathy in her voice. She came up the stairs without stomping, paused at the doorway, and read the room before entering it. She was in her 40s, sturdy and compact, with ash-blonde hair tied low and eyes that did not flinch from ugly realities. Her coat carried the scent of antiseptic, cold air, and animal shelters. Rowan liked her immediately for the way she did not say, "Poor thing," as if pity were treatment. Instead, she crouched several feet away from Mara and said, "Hello, soldier." Mara's lips twitched. Lenora nodded once. "That's fair?" "She's Mara," Rowan said. Lenora's eyes flicked to him. Something changed in her expression. Recognition, and then anger, carefully locked behind professionalism. "The Whitcomb dog?" Rowan did not answer. Lenora looked back at Mara. "Right?" She worked slowly, no sudden reaches, no leaning over Mara's head. She asked Rowan to move the lamp, then the water, then himself, not because she needed help, but because every object in the room mattered to a dog who believed pain came in patterns. Mara would not allow a full examination at first. She snapped once when Lenora's hand came near her neck. Rowan did not correct her. Lenora did not take offense. "Good," Lenora said under her breath, still willing to argue. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. Dehydration, malnutrition, cracked nails, skin inflammation from cold and filth, tenderness along the muzzle, pressure marks around the neck and under the jaw, not fresh wounds only. Repeated restraint. Lenora's mouth flattened. Rowan stood near the wall because standing anywhere else felt like too much. His hands stayed loose at his sides. That was training, or discipline, or the last rope holding back a grief that wanted to become violence. "How long?" he asked. "Hard to say." Lenora lifted the flashlight away from Mara's eyes. "Weeks outside, at least. Damage before that? Longer?" Mara shifted, then suddenly lifted her head toward the floorboards. From below came laughter, a burst of applause from the diner. Someone clapped twice, loud and careless. Mara exploded backward. Not far. The room was too small. But her body slammed into the dresser, teeth bared, eyes wild, breath tearing through her. For one awful second, she was not in Maeve's rented room. She was somewhere with bright lights and hands reaching down, and a name she had never chosen being called over and over by strangers who wanted her stillness for their comfort. Rowan dropped to one knee. Not close. Just lower. Lenora went still. Maeve, standing in the doorway, whispered a word that might have been a prayer and might have been profanity dressed for church. The applause below faded into ordinary diner noise. Mara kept shaking. Rowan took the metal tag from his pocket and set it on the floor between them. Mara's eyes caught the movement. Her nose worked once, twice. The tag had no magic in it, no miracle. It was metal, scratched and cold, but it carried the old name, the real one, the shape of a promise the world had tried to misfile. Mara stretched her neck forward an inch, then another. She did not touch the tag, but she stopped shaking so hard. Lenora noticed. Of course she did. "That," she said quietly, "means something to her." It should. The room settled after that, though not into peace. Peace was too far away. It settled into watchfulness. Lenora gave instructions. Water placed where Mara could reach without crossing open space, small food portions, no sudden sounds, no crowding, no touching her neck unless necessary. Warmth, not fussing. Distance, not abandonment. When Maeve came back with a strip of clean cloth to lay near the blankets, Mara saw the color before anyone else did. Red, not bright, not even deliberate, just an old kitchen towel with a faded red edge. Mara's body went rigid again. Maeve stopped so fast the cloth swung in her hand. Lenora looked from the towel to Mara, then to Rowan. There it is. What? A trigger. Maeve slowly backed the cloth out of sight. Well, that rag's retired. Lenora did not smile. Red ribbon? Rowan thought of the photograph in Sterling's sitting room. Mara beside him, polished and still, with the red ribbon and the gold crest. Yes? Lenora exhaled through her nose. A few months ago, I was called up to Whitcomb Crest. They said they had a dog that had become uncontrollable around guests. By the time I arrived, the dog was gone. Rowan looked at her. You knew? I suspected. Lenora's voice hardened, but not at him. I asked for records. Their lawyer told me the animal was privately owned and had been transferred to a specialized care arrangement. No location given, no access. I filed a concern with County Animal Services. And? No visible dog, no proof. Whitcomb was funding kennel repairs for the county that month. Her eyes lifted to Rowan's. You can guess how loudly my concern echoed. Maeve made a bitter sound. Around here, money buys better walls than brick. Lenora packed slowly, then paused beside the door. There's a woman behind whatever letter shut me out. Nadine Cross, Whitcomb's attorney. If she learns Mara is here, she'll move fast. Rowan looked down at Mara. Mara had lowered her head onto the blanket, but her eyes remained open. "Let her," he said. Lenora's gaze sharpened. "No, don't make this a battlefield before she can stand. If you want to help her, you start by not letting your anger outrun her healing." The words struck harder because they were right. Rowan said nothing. Lenora nodded once, accepting the silence as agreement, and left. The first night was not merciful. Mara did not sleep so much as fall in and out of brief surrender. She refused the bowl while anyone watched. When Rowan turned his chair toward the window and kept his face angled away, he heard the faint lap of water behind him. He didn't move. He didn't praise her. Praise could be pressure, too, if a creature had learned that attention came with cost. Near dawn, she ate 3 small bites of chicken Maeve had sent up wrapped in wax paper. Then she retreated to the blankets as if ashamed of needing anything. Rowan sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame. Every instinct in him wanted to close the distance, to rest a hand on her shoulder, to apologize in a language Touch could understand. But Mara had been touched too many times by people who wanted something from her, so he gave her the harder apology. He stayed still. By the second day, the room developed a careful rhythm. Maeve left food outside the door and knocked only once. Rowan moved slowly, spoke little, slept less. Mara watched him with eyes that carried 2 truths at once. She knew him, and she did not yet trust the world that had brought him back. Once, when he changed the water, she pushed herself halfway upright and stared at his hand. Not the bowl. His hand. He froze. Her gaze moved to his face, then away. A bridge plank laid down. Nothing more. Later, when she shifted in sleep, the fur at her neck parted. Rowan saw the scar. Not the old working collar mark. This was different. Lower? Wider? A rub line from something decorative and badly fitted, tightened often enough to make the skin remember. He did not touch it. He took the folded newspaper clipping from the dresser and held it near the lamp. There was Liberty Bell in the photograph, red ribbon, gold crest, Sterling's hand resting too close to her neck. Rowan looked from the picture to the dog on the blanket. Mara had not simply been taken from him. She had been renamed into obedience, polished into gratitude, displayed until fear became inconvenient, then erased when the story stopped selling. The thought did not bring rage this time. It brought something colder. Clarity. Late that evening, a soft knock came at the door. Rowan opened it to find no one in the hall, only a bowl of soup on a tray, steam curling upward, and a folded note in Maeve's sharp handwriting. "For you. Not the dog. Don't be foolish with onions." He almost smiled. Inside, Mara slept in fragments under the old blanket, her paws twitching now and then, her head still angled toward the door. Rowan placed the soup on the dresser and returned to the floor, leaving the lamp low. He did not know when Sterling would hear. He did not know what Nadine Cross would do. He did not know whether Mara would ever press her head to his knee again without fear standing between them. But sometime past midnight, while snow tapped softly against the window, Mara opened her eyes and looked at him. Not long, only a few seconds. Then she lowered her head again and stayed asleep. Rowan sat in the dim room, the old metal tag resting between them like a small moon fallen to earth, and understood the truth at last. Finding Mara had not completed the promise. It had only taught him what the promise required. To return was easy. To stay while trust learned how to breathe again. That would be the harder war. By the third morning, Mara had begun to drink while Rowan remained in the room. Not close, not watching, but present. It was a small thing, the sort of victory no one would carve into stone. Yet Rowan knew better than most men that survival was often built out of small things no one applauded. One clean breath, one step forward, one night without running from the dark inside your own skull. Mara stood near the bowl by the radiator, her black and gold coat still rough, where the dirt had not yet fully combed free. Her ribs no longer seemed quite as sharp beneath her fur, but her eyes remained guarded. She drank 3 mouthfuls, paused, checked Rowan's hands, then drank again. Rowan kept his gaze lowered to the photograph in his hand. He had taken it the night before, quietly, after Maeve brought up clean towels and pretended not to worry. In the picture, Mara lay on the old blanket, head lifted, eyes tired but alive. Not the polished Liberty Bell from Whitcomb's wall. Not the heroic animal on a fundraiser brochure. Just Mara, wounded and watchful, with the torn right ear and the old scar at her neck. He printed the photo at the pharmacy on Main Street an hour later. Then he drove back to Vivian Rook. Her house looked even smaller under the new snow. When Vivian opened the door and saw Rowan standing there, she did not ask if he had found Mara. Perhaps his face told her before the photograph did. Perhaps guilt had been waiting at the window all morning, watching the road for proof. Rowan held out the picture. Vivian took it with both hands. For a while she did not breathe properly. Her eyes moved over the dog's thin body, the blanket, the guarded stare. Then her mouth trembled, and she pressed the photograph to her chest as if it had burned her. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, girl." Rowan stood in the doorway, cold air at his back. "She's alive." Vivian nodded, though the words seemed to have taken strength from her knees. She stepped aside and let him in. The house had not changed since his first visit, but Rowan noticed more now. A row of old leashes hung near the mudroom, each with a small tag attached. Not decoration, memory. On the kitchen table sat a stack of unpaid-looking envelopes, a cracked mug, and a metal tin filled with dog biscuits for dogs that no longer came. Vivian lowered herself into a chair. "She looks worse than I imagined," she said. "Then you imagined it?" The words were hard. Rowan did not soften them. Vivian accepted the blow. Yes, he sat across from her this time, not because he had forgiven her, because standing would make the conversation too easy to turn into judgment, and judgment alone would not bring him what he needed. "I need everything you kept." Vivian looked toward the boxes against the wall. "I kept more than I should have." "Good." "No," she said quietly. It wasn't courage, it was cowardice with a filing system. Rowan said nothing. Vivian rose and carried over a cardboard banker's box with Hearthline, transfers/winter closure written in black marker across the side. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were folders, printed emails, copies of contracts, old vet invoices, grant letters, donation pledges, and a ledger with numbers circled in red. The collapse of Hearthline was not one catastrophe. It was a slow burial. Payroll delayed 2 weeks, then 4. Medication accounts overdue. Heating bills rising during a hard winter. A donor withdrawal after an administrative complaint. A licensing review. A threat from a vendor's lawyer. Staff leaving because kindness did not pay rent. Vivian spread the papers between them. "I thought if I could get them placed, I could fix the paperwork later," she said. That was the lie I told myself. That later existed. Rowan found Mara's temporary care agreement near the bottom of a file. There it was again. Return to handler upon discharge clearance. No permanent transfer without handler confirmation. His jaw tightened. "You knew this?" "Yes." "And Whitcomb knew?" Vivian pulled out a printed email. The sender's address belonged to someone at Whitcomb Crest Administration. The language was neat, polished, almost bloodless. "Mr. Whitcomb is particularly interested in a retired military dog with strong patriotic appeal for the winter campaign. A German Shepherd would be ideal, provided temperament can be managed for public-facing events." Rowan read the line twice. Not adopted. Selected. Vivian watched his face. "They wanted Mara before the transfer papers were even complete," he said. "Yes?" "Why didn't you stop it?" Vivian folded her hands together so tightly the knuckles blanched. "Because stopping it required power I did not have. Because the county was threatening relocation. Because Whitcomb's attorney said delaying transfer could expose us to further liability. Because I had dogs shivering in runs with heaters failing." She swallowed. "Because I was tired, Mr. Bell, and tired people sometimes mistake the nearest open door for mercy." Rowan wanted to answer. No sentence came that would not be cruel without being useful. Vivian pushed another folder toward him. "Take these copies, not the originals. I may need them if this becomes what I think it's becoming." "What do you think it's becoming?" She looked at Mara's photograph on the table. A reckoning that should have happened before she paid for it. By afternoon, the reckoning had noticed him back. A letter waited at Maeve's diner when Rowan returned. Cream paper, legal header. Delivered by courier, according to Maeve, who had apparently inspected the envelope with the moral suspicion usually reserved for expired milk. "A woman in a black coat brought it," Maeve said. "Looked like she sues people for breathing wrong." Rowan opened it at the counter. Nadine Cross had signed the bottom. The letter demanded immediate return of the German Shepherd, known as Liberty Bell, legally adopted into the custody of Whitcomb Crest Holdings. It described Mara as potentially dangerous, Rowan's possession of her as unauthorized, and his continued interference as grounds for civil action. There was a separate paragraph advising local parties against harboring, treating, or concealing disputed property. Maeve leaned over just enough to read upside down. "Disputed property," she said flatly. "That's a fancy way to say they've never had a dog look at them like they mattered." Rowan folded the letter. Downstairs, someone laughed at the lunch counter. A fork rang against a plate. Mara, in the room above, would hear that sound. He imagined her lifting her head, measuring whether the world had become dangerous again. Maeve's face softened before she could hide it. "How is she?" "Eating a little?" "Good. I made broth. No onions. Since apparently I'm running a secret hospital now." "You don't have to help." "I know," Maeve said. "That's why it counts." At Abel's garage, the letter had already arrived in another form. Whitcomb Crest had canceled its winter maintenance contract. Abel stood under the raised hood of a snowmobile, reading the message on his phone while a space heater rattled behind him. His gray beard twitched. His eyes did not. "Congratulations," he said when Rowan walked in. "You're officially expensive." "I can leave." Abel looked offended. "Don't be stupid in my garage. That's my job." Whitcomb was a big contract. Whitcomb was a rich contract. There's a difference. Abel shoved the phone into his pocket. "Besides, I already hated tuning their rental machines. Tourists drive like drunken squirrels with credit cards." Rowan almost smiled. Abel tossed him a set of keys. "What's this?" "Side door, if you need tools after hours." "Why?" Abel picked up a wrench. "Because you're a tactical shirt-wearing trouble magnet, and I prefer knowing where the explosion is going to start." It was not a speech of loyalty. That made it better. Rowan spent the next 2 days gathering what did not want to be gathered. Most doors did not slam in his face. That would have been easier. They opened halfway. People lowered their voices. A desk clerk at Whitcomb Crest said she had only worked there since November. A former kennel assistant refused to meet his eyes and said she had a family to feed. A man who handled lodge deliveries told Rowan he remembered the dog, then suddenly remembered he did not. Fear in White Pine Hollow was not theatrical. It wore work gloves. It checked bank balances. It counted winter bookings. The first real crack came from Clara Voss. Maeve gave Rowan the name, though she pretended she was only gossiping about pastry orders. Clara had managed events at Whitcomb Crest before resigning the previous fall. She now lived above a closed stationery shop near the old church, where the windows were covered with paper snowflakes left by the previous tenant. Clara opened the door only after Rowan said Mara's name. She was in her early 40s with chestnut hair clipped back on one side and a face too tired for the careful composure she was trying to wear. Her apartment smelled faintly of printer ink, coffee, and unopened mail. A laptop sat on the table beside a stack of event programs tied with twine. "I signed an NDA," she said before he finished explaining. "I'm not asking you to break it." "Yes, you are." Rowan did not deny it. Clara's gaze moved past him to the stairwell, then back. "Do you have her?" "Yes." "How bad?" He showed her the photograph. Clara's hand went to her mouth. Unlike Vivian, she did not cry. Her guilt traveled differently. It drained the color from her face and made her sit down as if the chair had appeared beneath her at the last possible moment. "She used to watch the exits," Clara said. "At every event. I thought it was training." "It was?" "No," Clara shook her head. "Not like that. Not after a while." She opened her laptop with fingers that hesitated over the keys. They called her Liberty Bell because donors loved it. Sterling said Mara sounded too severe, too personal. He wanted something warmer, something people could put on a brochure. Her voice had gone thin with disgust. Clara pulled up photographs not used in the public campaign. Behind-the-scenes shots. Mara standing under chandelier light while a staff member adjusted the red ribbon around her neck. Mara surrounded by guests leaning too close. Mara's eyes turned toward a side door in nearly every frame. Then Clara opened an email. "If the dog continues reacting negatively, to touch, reduce unscripted guest interaction. Maintain visual presence for donor reception." Another, "Do not refer to prior handler in front of guests. Narrative should remain centered on Whitcomb adoption and rehabilitation." Rowan read without moving. The room seemed to dim around the words. Clara whispered, "There was a man at the founders' dinner, drunk. He grabbed her ear. She snapped at his sleeve. Didn't break skin. Sterling was furious because the donor's wife saw it." "What happened after?" "They took Mara out through the service hall. I heard Sterling say she was no longer viable for public-facing work." Clara shut her eyes. The next day she was gone. "Who took her?" "I don't know." "Clara." "I don't." Her voice cracked. "I asked. Nadine told me the matter had been handled and reminded me my contract included confidentiality after termination. A week later, my position was eliminated." She reached into a drawer and took out a small silver flash drive. "I copied what I could before I left. I told myself it was protection in case they blame me for something. That's the noble version." She placed it on the table. "The true version is that I was scared and wanted proof I wasn't the worst person in the room." Rowan picked up the drive. "Proof doesn't make you innocent." "No," Clara said, "but maybe it can make me useful." When Rowan returned to the diner, Evan Pruitt was waiting. He stood near the back entrance in a Dark County Animal Services coat, cap in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. He was 60, broad through the middle, with a neatly trimmed silver mustache and the weary posture of a man who had spent too many years turning messy living things into forms and case numbers. "Mr. Bell," he said, "I need to inspect the dog." Maeve, standing behind the counter, narrowed her eyes. "The dog has a name." Evan looked uncomfortable. "Mara, then." Rowan studied him. "On whose request?" "County protocol." "On whose request?" Evan's jaw shifted. "Whitcomb's attorney filed concern regarding an unstable animal." Maeve made a sound like a kettle beginning to boil. Rowan led Evan upstairs because refusing would give Nadine exactly what she wanted. Mara was awake when they entered. She lifted her head from the blanket. Her body tensed at the uniform coat, not violently, but with the terrible readiness of an animal expecting to lose ground. Evan stopped in the doorway. Whatever form he had prepared in his head seemed to meet Mara's eyes and lose confidence. "She's under veterinary care," Rowan said. "Dr. Pike has records." Evan nodded slowly. He did not step closer. That was the first decent thing he did. "I remember the report Lenora filed," he said after a moment. Rowan looked at him. Evan swallowed. There wasn't enough to act on. No visible animal, no confirmed injury. Whitcomb had paperwork. "And funding repairs for your kennels." Evan's face reddened. Maeve from the hall muttered, "Funny how paperwork gets heavier when money sits on top of it." Evan removed his cap fully and held it in both hands. His silver mustache twitched once, not with humor. "I won't seize her today," he said. "Today?" "I have to file an observation, and there'll be a hearing if Whitcomb pushes it." He looked at Mara again. "But I'll note her condition. I'll note she's not an immediate public threat. I'll note the records are incomplete." It was not heroism. It was a small repair made by a man who had helped build the damage. Rowan accepted it because small repairs mattered. That night, the television downstairs played some local winter festival segment. A crowd clapped. The sound traveled through the floorboards, muffled but sharp enough. Mara jerked awake. Her legs scrambled against the blanket. Her eyes went wide, fixed on nothing in the room. Rowan turned the volume down through the floor by calling Maeve, but the damage had already arrived. Mara shook near the radiator, trapped between the past and the present. Rowan sat on the floor several feet away, his hands open on his knees. "I know," he said. "I know." But knowing did not free her. A knock came at the door. Maeve stood there, holding an official envelope she had not opened. Her face had lost its usual bite. This came by county courier. Rowan took it. Inside was a notice requiring Mara's appearance at a behavioral evaluation before the town council and county animal services. Failure to appear could result in removal pending legal review. The date was soon. Too soon. Mara still trembled at the fading echo of applause below. Rowan looked from the paper to the dog. Sterling was not only reaching for Mara through law, he was reaching through the very sounds that had broken her. And Rowan understood then that the enemy was not just a wealthy man with a lawyer. It was every room Mara had been forced to stand in while strangers clapped for a name that was not hers. The community hall stood beside the frozen lake like a plain old ship that had been hauled on to land and forgotten there. Its white paint had peeled in thin strips near the windows. The steps had been salted badly. Wind moved across the ice outside and struck the building in low, hollow breaths, as if the lake itself were listening. Inside, winter light came through the tall windows and spread across the wooden floor in pale rectangles. Rowan arrived early. He did not do it because he hoped to appear respectful. He did it so Mara could meet the room before the room met her. She stood just inside the door, thin but cleaner now, her black and gold coat brushed as much as she would allow. The torn V at the edge of her right ear showed clearly. Her left hind leg still set down with that careful half-beat of old injury. Around her neck was no ribbon, no decorative collar, nothing that belonged to Whitcomb Crest. Only a plain, temporary lead loose in Rowan's hand. Mara lifted her nose. Wood polish, wet wool, coffee, paper, human nerves. Her ears shifted back. Rowan lowered his hand, palm open near his thigh, not touching her. "Just a room," he said quietly. Mara did not believe him. He could not blame her. Rooms had not been kind to her. One by one, the others arrived. Dr. Lenora Pike came in with her brown medical bag and the expression of someone prepared to dislike everyone equally if necessary. Evan Pruitt followed in his county coat, a folder tucked under one arm, his silver mustache trimmed too neatly for the discomfort on his face. Vivian Rook entered quietly and sat near the back, her old barn coat buttoned wrong, as if her hands had forgotten the order of things. Clara Voss came carrying a laptop bag against her chest like a shield. Abel Crow arrived with snow on his boots and oil under one fingernail, muttering that any meeting before noon should be classified as a public health risk. Maeve Larkin brought a thermos of coffee no one had asked for and gave the town council table a look that suggested she might pour it over them if they earned it. Then Sterling Whitcomb entered. He wore a charcoal coat over a dark suit, silver hair perfectly combed, face arranged into sorrow dignified enough for witnesses. Nadine Cross walked beside him, slim and sharp in a navy suit, her black folder held flat against her ribs. She did not look at Mara first. She looked at Rowan. That told him enough. The town council sat at a long table near the front. 3 people, all uncomfortable. The chairwoman, Colleen Marsh, had the tired firmness of someone who had chaired too many meetings about snow removal and too few about conscience. She explained the purpose in a careful voice. This was a behavioral review and preliminary custody discussion, not a final court ruling. Nadine stood before Colleen had fully finished. "Thank you, Chairwoman Marsh. We appreciate the town making time for a matter of public safety." Public safety? The phrase moved through the hall like cold water under a door. Mara heard the change in voices, if not the words. Her body drew closer to Rowan's leg. Nadine continued smoothly. She spoke of liability, emotional attachment, uncertain ownership, and the danger of allowing a former military dog with traumatic conditioning to remain in an unsecured private room above a diner. She never raised her voice. She did not have to. Every sentence was polished enough to slide between fear and reason without leaving fingerprints. Then she turned slightly toward Rowan. "Mr. Bell's devotion may be sincere, but sincerity is not a behavioral standard, nor does military history, however honorable, qualify one to override local animal safety procedures." Rowan felt several people look at him. He did not move. Sterling rose next, slower, softer. "When our family took Liberty Bell in," he said, "we did so with gratitude. We wanted to give her comfort after service. We wanted the town to honor her." Mara's ears went flat at the false name. Rowan saw it. Lenora saw it. Nadine likely saw it too, but only as a useful tremor. Sterling placed one hand over his coat button, a small gesture of practiced feeling. But some wounds are deeper than affection can reach. There are animals, sadly, who cannot overcome what has been done to them. The room fell quiet. Rowan's hand closed once, then opened again. He knew what Sterling wanted, not just to win, to make Rowan angry in public, to turn the room's eyes from Mara's pain to Rowan's temper. A man with a military past did not need to shout much before people began filling in the rest of the story themselves. So Rowan stayed still. Mara did not. She took one step forward, then stopped. Not toward Sterling, toward the empty space between the council table and the chairs where the pale sunlight lay across the floor. For a strange second, she looked less like a frightened dog and more like a witness approaching an altar. Then something clanged. A metal serving tray slipped from a side table near the wall and struck the floor with a bright, hard crash. Mara recoiled. Her body slammed backward against Rowan's leg. Her teeth flashed, not in attack, in terror. Her breath broke into short, sharp pulls. Around the room, chairs creaked. Someone gasped. Nadine's gaze fixed on the dog with the stillness of a hunter who had not moved but had already drawn the bow. Rowan did not pull the lead tight. He did not command. He lowered himself 1 inch, just enough to make his body smaller beside her. His bare hand opened near the seam of his pants. Not on the floor this time. Not a performance. Just the old shape of safety. Mara shook so hard the lead trembled. "Mara," Rowan said. Her eyes found his hand first, then his face. The room waited for a bark, for a lunge, for the proof fear had already written in their minds. Mara's paws shifted, her chest heaved. She remained standing for one more unbearable breath. Then she sat, not gracefully, not peacefully. Her body still shook, but she sat beside Rowan's leg, head low, eyes open, choosing the present by the width of a thread. No bark came, no bite, no charge, only silence. And somehow that silence filled the hall more powerfully than any defense Rowan could have made. Lenora stood before Nadine could speak. "That," she said, "is a trauma response, not aggression." Nadine's mouth tightened. "Dr. Pike, no one disputes the animal has endured stress." "No," Lenora said, "you're attempting to rename that stress as danger." A murmur moved through the room. Lenora stepped forward, not toward Mara, but toward the council. "A dangerous dog seeks to close distance and cause harm." Mara tried to retreat. When given space and a known calming cue, she regulated. Poorly, because she is not healed. But she did not escalate. Evan cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him, and he seemed to regret having a throat at all. "My office reviewed the earlier concern filed by Dr. Pike," he said. "At the time, we had insufficient access to verify conditions at Whitcomb Crest." Nadine turned. "Mr. Pruitt, this is hardly—" "I'm not finished." Evan's voice was not loud, but it surprised even him. He removed his cap from the chair beside him and held it in both hands. "There were gaps in the record. I should have pursued them more aggressively. Given the dog's current condition and the documents provided by Ms. Rook, I cannot support removal today on an emergency basis." Sterling's face remained composed. His eyes did not. Vivian rose next. Her hand shook as she carried the folder to the council table. "This is the original temporary care agreement," she said. "Mara was placed with Hearthline until Rowan Bell received discharge clearance. Permanent transfer required handler confirmation." Nadine stepped forward. "A financially distressed facility executing emergency placement." "Was still bound by its own contract," Vivian said. The words cost her. They also seemed to steady her. Clara connected her laptop to the old projector with Abel's help, since the hall's technology appeared to have been assembled during a more optimistic century. When the first image appeared on the pull-down screen, Mara turned her head away. It was one of the fundraiser photographs. Red ribbon, gold crest, chandelier light, Sterling smiling beside her. But then Clara showed the photographs not meant for brochures. Mara standing stiff while hands adjusted the ribbon. Mara pinned between guests. Mara's gaze fixed on service doors, exits, corners. Then the emails came, instructions not to mention Rowan, notes about maintaining visual presence, warnings about unscripted guest contact. Nadine objected to context, legality, admissibility. Colleen Marsh rubbed her forehead and said this was not a courtroom, which somehow annoyed everyone equally. Then a voice from the back said, "It happened after the founders' dinner." The hall turned. Maribel Whitcomb stood near the rear aisle. No one had seen her enter. She wore a pale gray coat, snow still melting along the hem, and her ash-blonde hair was pinned low but coming loose near one temple. One hand held the small silver pendant at her throat. Her face was very white. Sterling rose halfway. "Maribel." She flinched at her name, then did not sit down. "I was there," she said. The room changed, not dramatically. No one shouted. But attention gathered around her like birds sensing a storm. Maribel walked slowly forward. She did not look at Sterling. That seemed to be the only way she could keep speaking. At the founders' dinner, a guest had been drinking. He wanted a photograph with Liberty Bell. Her voice caught on the name. She corrected herself. "With Mara?" He pulled her ear. Hard. She snapped at his sleeve. She did not bite him. Sterling's face became still in a way Rowan recognized from the sitting room. Maribel's fingers tightened around the pendant. Sterling was furious, not because anyone had hurt her, because guests saw, because a donor's wife was upset. He said Mara was no longer viable for public-facing work. Nadine said, "Mrs. Whitcomb, I would advise—" "I am not Mrs. Whitcomb," Maribel said, softly but clearly, "and I am tired of being advised into silence." The line struck the room harder than a raised voice. For the first time, Maeve stopped holding her thermos like a weapon. Maribel continued. The kennel manager was told to transfer her out, far enough that she would not return. I heard Sterling say there could be no loose ends before the winter campaign audit. Sterling's voice dropped. You don't understand what you heard. I understood enough to hate myself for months. Her eyes finally moved to Mara. Mara was looking back, not with recognition, with caution, yet there was no growl. The manager did not kill her, Maribel said. He left her near an old logging road outside Northfield Ridge. I found that out later. He told me because he needed someone to know he had not done the worst thing he was asked to do. A heavy silence followed. Outside, wind crossed the frozen lake and pressed against the hall windows. Maribel looked at the council now. She found her way back. I don't know how. Maybe along roads, maybe by scent, maybe because dogs remember places where their names were taken from them. Sterling stepped into the aisle. This is an emotional distortion from a troubled family matter. Rowan expected Maribel to fold under that. She did not. I have been troubled, she said, but not by memory. Nadine asked for an immediate continuance. She did it calmly, efficiently, almost before the room could breathe again. The documents needed review. Maribel's statement needed corroboration. The council should avoid a rushed decision influenced by emotional testimony. Sterling remained standing, his grief mask still in place, though now it seemed thinner, like frost under a boot. Colleen granted the postponement. Not a victory, not a defeat. Something worse for Sterling, delay with witnesses. As people began to stand, no one knew where to look. Some looked at Mara, some at Rowan, some at Sterling, then quickly away. Shame had entered the hall, and shame, unlike fear, did not know where to sit. Rowan guided Mara toward the door. She moved slowly, exhausted by the room, by the tray, by the photographs, by the name Liberty Bell, spoken one too many times. Near the threshold, she paused and looked back, not at Sterling, at the empty space where the tray had fallen. Then she stepped outside. Snow was falling again, light and steady, bright against the gray afternoon. Rowan stood beneath the eaves while Mara lowered her nose to the cold air. Her body still trembled, but not as violently now. He did not tell her she had done well. Not yet. Praise could feel like another performance. Instead, he stood beside her while the town emptied behind them. Maeve came out first and placed a hand on Rowan's sleeve. She did not speak. Abel followed, muttering that the tray had better have fallen by accident, because if it hadn't, he had a wrench with a strong opinion. Clara wiped her eyes angrily, as though offended by them. Vivian remained on the steps, looking at Mara like a person who had just watched a name climb out of a grave. Across the lot, Sterling walked to his car beside Nadine. His calm had returned. But it was thinner now. Rowan knew they had not won, not legally, not yet. Nadine would move. Sterling would adjust the story. The town would spend the night deciding how much truth it could afford. But Mara had stood in a room built to judge her. She had been startled, cornered by memory, watched by people who expected her fear to become violence. And she had not barked. In her silence, she had said what no one in White Pine Hollow could comfortably unhear. I was hurt. I am still here, and I am not the name you gave me. The storm arrived before dawn, not with thunder, but with patience. It laid itself over White Pine Hollow, hour by hour, whitening the roads, closing the distance between houses, swallowing fence posts until only their dark tips remained. By noon, the lake had vanished behind blowing snow. By afternoon, the town looked less like a place people lived in and more like a memory winter had decided to keep for itself. At Maeve's diner, the windows had fogged from the heat inside. Wind pressed against the glass, rattling it now and then like a hand asking to be let in. Rowan stood near the back stairwell with Mara beside him. She was stronger than she had been when he found her, but not whole. Her coat had begun to regain its deep black and gold shape, though some patches still lay rough along her ribs. She stood close to Rowan's left side, not leaning, not hiding, simply keeping him within reach. Since the hearing, she had been quieter than before. Not calmer, exactly. Quieter, as if the room of witnesses had taken something out of her and left a new space she did not yet know how to fill. The final hearing was set for the next day. Then the storm came. Maeve looked up from the counter as the door opened and a figure stepped in wrapped in pale gray wool. Maribel Whitcomb lowered her hood with hands that trembled from more than cold. Snow clung to her hair and shoulders. Her face was colorless, but her eyes went first to Mara. Mara stiffened. Rowan placed one hand low, palm open. Maribel did not come closer. That was wise or kind. Sometimes they were the same thing. "I shouldn't be here," Maribel said. Maeve poured coffee into a mug without asking. That's what most people say right before they sit down. Maribel did not sit. "There's a box," she said to Rowan, "in the auxiliary storage room at the lodge. I saw it this morning before Sterling had the staff move records upstairs." Rowan's expression did not change, but every part of him listened. "What kind of box?" "Wooden, old, it has Mara's things." Maribel's voice shook slightly when she used the name. "Her military collar, her real tag, copies of medical papers, maybe more. I heard Nadine tell Sterling that anything connected to the original transfer needed to be secured before tomorrow." Maeve set the coffee down harder than necessary. "Secured, that's a fancy word for hidden by people with clean fingernails." Maribel swallowed. "The storm trapped several investors at the lodge. Sterling is still holding the private reception tonight. He wants everyone to see that nothing is out of control." Rowan looked toward the window where snow moved sideways through the darkening street. "Of course he does." "I can get you inside," Maribel said. "But not for long." Mara stepped forward then. Only one pace. Her nose lifted toward Maribel's coat. Something in the wool carried the scent of Whitcomb Crest. Cedar smoke, polished floors, expensive soap, old fear. Mara's breathing changed. Rowan expected her to retreat. Instead, she moved between him and the door, not eager, not unafraid, but waiting. Rowan crouched beside her. "You don't have to go back there." Mara did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on the door as the wind struck it again. He understood then that he had been making the same mistake in a gentler shape. He had wanted to protect her from the place that hurt her. But protection could become another locked door if it denied her the right to stand inside her own story. "She comes only if she chooses," Rowan said. Maribel's eyes filled, but she nodded. Mara remained by the door. Maeve crossed her arms. "Well, if you're all determined to drive into a blizzard like characters in a bad sermon, at least take sandwiches." Abel Crow arrived 10 minutes later in his old yellow tow truck, which sounded as if every bolt in it was arguing with God. He leaned out the window, gray cap pulled low, beard frosted at the edges. "You called for rescue before doing the stupid thing," he shouted over the wind. "That's personal growth. I'm proud and annoyed." The road up Whitcomb Hill had become a white chute between pines. Rowan drove behind Abel's tow truck, headlights blurred by snow. Maribel sat in the passenger seat, silent, one hand wrapped around her silver pendant. Mara lay in the back seat, head up, ears shifting with every groan of the storm. Halfway up, Rowan's truck slid. It was not dramatic. No great spin, no cinematic plunge. Just one slow, helpless drift toward the shoulder, then a heavy drop into the snowy ditch. The tires buried themselves at once. Abel's brake lights glowed ahead. A minute later, he trudged back through the storm, rope in hand, muttering loudly enough for the pines to benefit. "Former special operators," he said, hooking the tow line. "Can jump out of helicopters, survive deserts, probably wrestle a bear if it signs a waiver, but put them on ice, and they drive like a drunk moose in church shoes." Mary Bell made a small sound. It took Rowan a second to realize she had laughed. Not much, barely a breath. But in the storm, with Whitcomb Crest waiting above them, it sounded almost rebellious. Abel hauled the truck free, slapped the hood twice, and pointed up the hill. "Try not to romance another ditch." By the time they reached the lodge, dusk had fallen early. Whitcomb Crest glowed through the storm like a ship refusing to admit it had struck ice. Lanterns burned along the entrance. Cars were buried under fresh snow. Inside the great front windows, figures moved beneath chandeliers. Sterling had filled the building with warmth and light and expensive denial. But the storm had begun to find the cracks. The power flickered as Rowan, Mara, Maribel, and Abel entered through a side service door. Somewhere down the corridor, a generator coughed. Staff hurried past carrying blankets and flashlights. From the main hall came the clipped voices of guests pretending not to be frightened. Mara stopped at the threshold of the service corridor. The smell hit her first. Waxed floors, cedar smoke, glassware, perfume. A red velvet rope lay coiled near a storage cart, her body locked. Rowan did not pull the lead. He waited. Maribel stood ahead, hands pressed together. "The storage room is beyond the east hall." Abel peered around the corner. Naturally, never hide important evidence near the coffee. A sharp cracking sound echoed from the front of the lodge. People shouted. Rowan moved toward the main hall, not because it was brave, but because the sound demanded knowing. The broad lobby was crowded with guests in winter formal wear, staff holding lanterns, and investors whose expensive coats suddenly seemed very thin. Near the side entrance, a glass canopy over the adjoining hallway had bowed under the weight of snow. One support frame had cracked, jamming the door and letting wind pour into the corridor. No one was trapped under anything. No grand disaster had struck. But panic had. An elderly guest clutched the arm of a staff member. Two others stood too close to the damaged glass, staring upward as if fear had pinned their shoes to the floor. A young waiter tried to move people back and kept being ignored because his jacket marked him as someone paid to be invisible. Rowan stepped in. "Move away from the glass," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. Abel took one look and began dragging a heavy bench across the floor to block the hallway. "You heard the man. Unless you're hoping to be seasoned with window shards, back up." That did it. People moved. Rowan and two staff members guided the older guests toward the inner lounge. Maribel helped a woman whose hands shook too hard to fasten her coat. For several minutes the matter was simple. Cold, glass, frightened people. A safer room. No glory. No speeches. Just the work in front of them. Mara remained near the lobby entrance. She trembled so hard Rowan could see it from across the hall, but she did not bolt. Then Sterling appeared at the top of the short staircase. He wore a dark suit and a face still arranged for control, though the storm had begun to loosen the edges. Nadine Cross stood behind him, phone in hand, already calculating how this would be described later. Sterling's gaze found Rowan, then Mara. For the first time, surprise broke through his polish. Only for a moment. Then he smiled. "Liberty Bell," he called softly. The lobby changed. Guests turned. Staff froze. Mara's head snapped toward him. The name landed like a thrown chain. Her front paws shifted backward. Her ears flattened. Her eyes went wide, not with confusion, but with memory. Rowan could almost see the old hall around her. Lights, hands, red ribbon, a voice calling a name that turned her into something useful and unreal. Sterling descended one step. "There you are, girl." Rowan did not move between them. It cost him more than anyone knew. He wanted to shield her. He wanted to end the sound of that name with his own hands, but this moment did not belong to his anger. It belonged to Mara. He loosened the lid until it hung like a question. Then he said, quietly enough that only those nearest heard, "Mara." Her body shook. Sterling's smile held. "Mara," Rowan said again. No command, no plea, just the truth. Mara turned her head. Her eyes met Rowan's. For one breath, she stood between two names, the one forced on her by a man in a beautiful lodge, and the one carried back to her through snow by someone who had arrived late, but stayed. Then she walked to Rowan, not quickly, not dramatically. Step by careful step, her left hind leg setting down with its old uneven beat, she crossed the polished floor and stood at his side. No one clapped. That silence was the first honest sound Whitcomb Crest had made all evening. Sterling's smile remained, but something behind it had been denied. Maribel moved first. "Now," she whispered. The storage room was colder than the rest of the lodge, tucked behind a narrow corridor used by staff and forgotten things. Clara Voss was already waiting there, breathless from a back entrance, snow melting on the shoulders of her dark coat. She held her phone in one hand and a small flashlight in the other. "You said there was a box," Clara said. Maribel pointed to a shelf behind stacked holiday garlands and event signage. Abel pried the shelf forward with a grunt. "If this turns out to be ornaments, I'm stealing one out of spite." It was not ornaments. The wooden box was old, dark, and heavier than it looked. Maribel opened it with a key she had taken from the service office. Inside lay Mara's past, folded and hidden. A black-brown military collar, a scratched metal tag, medical records, the original transfer notice, and a printed internal memo with Sterling Whitcomb's initials beside one paragraph. Handler return clause noted. Proceed with public-facing adoption narrative unless challenged. Avoid reference to temporary care status. Clara photographed everything, hands shaking only after the first few shots. Rowan picked up the collar. Mara stood in the doorway. She did not come closer, her eyes fixed on the collar as if it were a bone pulled from frozen ground. Rowan knelt and held it low. "Not yet," he said softly. "Only when you're ready." Behind them, footsteps sounded. Evan Pruitt appeared with Lenora Pike, both dusted with snow. Lenora had clearly been called in for the damaged hallway and refused to leave once she understood what had been found. Evan looked at the box, then at Rowan, then at Maribel. His face sank with the weight of what procedure now demanded. "I need to witness this," Evan said. "No," Lenora corrected, voice low. "You need to do it properly this time." Evan nodded. He removed an evidence bag from his county kit and began documenting the contents with care that was almost penance. Clara kept taking photographs. Maribel stood with her hand around the pendant at her throat, crying silently now, not in collapse, but in release. When they returned to the main hall, the storm had begun to soften. Guests stood in small clusters, whispering. Staff avoided Sterling's eyes. Nadine spoke rapidly into her phone near the fireplace, but even her voice seemed smaller than before. Sterling stood alone beneath the chandelier where Mara had once been posed for photographs. Rowan did not confront him. He did not need to. Mara walked beside Rowan across the lobby, still trembling, still scarred, still afraid of the place. But beside him. The collar and tag were sealed now. no longer hidden in a box, no longer trapped under the language of branding and ownership. The lodge had seen them. The staff had seen. The guests had heard the false name called and watched Mara choose the real one. For a man who had built his kingdom on image, there was no louder defeat than a room full of witnesses saying nothing. Outside, the snow eased into a soft fall. The hill, the lodge, the trees, and the road below were all white again. But this time, the snow did not feel like concealment. It felt like a page waiting for a correction. The final hearing was not held in the community hall. The storm had left one side of that old building with water damage, cracked glass, and a roof beam that groaned whenever the wind remembered it. So the town moved the meeting to the white church at the edge of White Pine Hollow, the one with the narrow steeple, the old bell, and stained glass windows that turned winter light into pieces of blue, red, and gold across the floor. It was not a courtroom. But that morning, it felt like a place where judgment had been waiting longer than the town itself. Snow covered the church steps in clean layers. People arrived quietly, stamping their boots, lowering their voices the way people did around grief, even when no one had died. Perhaps that was the trouble. Something had died in White Pine Hollow long before Mara came back. Courage, maybe, or the habit of calling cruelty by its proper name. Rowan arrived with Mara at his side. She wore the old military collar now, not for display. Not as proof, not as a costume for anyone's patriotism. Rowan had held it out to her that morning and waited. Mara had sniffed it, stepped back, then returned. Only when she lowered her head slightly did he fasten it around her neck. The metal tag rested against her chest. Mara Rowan Bell, return upon discharge, clearance. She still trembled when the church door opened and voices rose inside. Her right ear twitched at every sharp sound. Her left hind leg set down carefully on the icy path. But she walked in, not ahead of Rowan, not behind him, beside him. The pews were nearly full. Lodge employees sat with their hands folded too tightly. Townspeople who had once looked away now stared at the floor. Vivian Rook sat near the front, wearing the same old barn coat, her hair pinned more neatly than before, though nothing about her looked at peace. Clara Voss had a laptop bag at her feet, and the exhausted face of someone who had chosen truth and now had to live with what truth might cost. Dr. Lenora Pike stood near the aisle, arms crossed, medical bag beside her boots. Maeve Larkin had brought coffee in a thermos and was pretending it was not for everyone. Abel Crow sat 2 pews back, glaring at the hymnals as if they had personally insulted him. Marybelle Whitcomb was alone. That was what Rowan noticed most. No family beside her, no Sterling, no graceful shield of wealth. She sat near the aisle in a pale gray coat, one hand on the silver pendant at her throat, looking both frightened and lighter than she had before. Sterling arrived last with Nadine Cross. He was dressed perfectly, dark suit, wool overcoat, silver hair combed back, face composed into calm injury. Nadine carried 2 folders this time, one black and one gray. She looked at the church, then at the crowd, then at Mara, as if measuring which parts of the room could still be controlled. Not enough, Rowan thought. Chairwoman Colleen Marsh called the hearing to order from a plain table set before the altar rail. Evan Pruitt sat to one side with county files stacked in front of him. He had no confidence in his face, but there was resolve there, which was better. Resolve was what men found when pride finally became too heavy to carry. Colleen explained the purpose. The town council would enter its recommendation regarding Mara's custody, and the county would address emergency animal control concerns. Civil matters beyond that would proceed through proper channels. Nadine stood first. She was concise, cold, efficient. She argued ownership paperwork, procedural confusion, reputational harm, uncertainty around witness motivations, and the risk of placing emotional testimony above legal documentation. She never called Mara Liberty Bell this time. Rowan noticed. Everyone noticed. Even Sterling noticed, though his face did not admit it. Then Sterling stood. He spoke softly about generosity, misunderstanding, the burden of public service, the difficulty of managing an animal with a traumatic military background. He said his family had tried to honor Mara. He said some efforts had been misinterpreted by people in pain. His voice filled the church like warm water poured over ice. For a while, it almost worked. That was the danger of men like Sterling. They did not sound like villains. They sounded like donors, hosts, committee members, men who knew how to send flowers after funerals and invoices after favors. Then Rowan rose. He had prepared nothing. That had worried Vivian, annoyed Maeve, and made Abel mutter that speeches were like snow blowers, useful only if they started on the first pull. But Rowan had learned long ago that the words a man polished too much often stopped sounding like him. He stepped into the aisle with Mara beside him. He did not talk about medals. He did not talk about missions in detail. He did not ask anyone to pity him for the life he had chosen or the things it had taken. He spoke of Mara. "She was assigned to me when I thought I still knew how to sleep," he said. "She learned my breathing before most people learned my name. She knew when a room was wrong. She knew when I was wrong. And more than once, she stayed beside men who were hurt because someone had to stay calm enough for the rest of us." Mara stood still. Her eyes moved across the church, then returned to Rowan. "When I left her at Hearthline, I did it under a temporary care agreement. I did it because I believed I was coming back. I believed the paper meant what it said." He looked down at her. "But paper only protects what people are willing to honor." The church was silent now. "I came late," Rowan said. "That part is mine. I will carry it, but late is not the same as never. And Mara was never a symbol first. She was never a campaign, never a ribbon, never a story someone else had the right to rename." He placed one hand lightly on his thigh, close enough that Mara could touch him if she chose. "She is a living soul, and I promised I would come back for her." He sat. No one clapped. Thank God, Rowan thought. Vivian came next. She walked to the front with Mara's original care agreement in both hands. Her voice shook at first, but it did not break. "Hearthline failed," she said. "I failed. I allowed emergency language to cover a transfer that never should have been permanent. I told myself debt and pressure made the decision unavoidable. They made it difficult, not right." She turned slightly, not toward Rowan, but toward Mara. "A center can close. A nonprofit can go bankrupt. Furniture can be sold. Files can be boxed. But a promise to a living being should not be liquidated with the office chairs." The sentence sat in the church like a bell after ringing. Lenora's testimony was practical and plain. She described Mara's condition when found: dehydration, malnutrition, cold exposure, pressure marks, trauma responses consistent with forced public handling and restraint. She did not dramatize. That made it worse. Some truths needed no thunder. They only needed a clean voice and no place to hide. Clara showed the photographs, the public ones first, the smiling donors, the ribbon, the staged pride. Then the private ones. Mara watching exits. Mara surrounded too closely. Mara under chandelier light with her ears low and body stiff. Emails followed, projected onto the church wall where scripture banners usually hung. Do not refer to prior handler in front of guests. Maintain visual presence. Public-facing adoption narrative. A murmur moved through the pews, not loud, but wounded. Evan Pruitt stood with his report. He looked older than he had at the first inspection, maybe because he had stopped hiding behind procedure long enough for conscience to catch up. "My office should have acted more thoroughly on Dr. Pike's concern," he said. "We did not. I did not. The paperwork presented by Hearthline, Mr. Bell, and the recovered records from Whitcomb Crest indicate irregular transfer and misrepresentation of custodial status. I do not recommend seizure of Mara from Mr. Bell. I recommend review of the adoption filing, the abandonment allegations, and the use of animal control documentation in this matter. It was bureaucratic. It was also, in its stiff way, a confession. Maribel spoke last. She did not repeat everything from the first hearing. She simply confirmed the order to remove Mara after the founders' dinner, the false story that followed, and her own silence. "I was afraid of losing my place in my family," she said. "Then I watched Mara lose her place in the world. I told myself those things were not connected." She lifted her chin. They were. Maeve stood from the third pew before anyone asked her to. Colleen blinked. "Mrs. Larkin, are you giving testimony?" "Apparently," Abel muttered. "Lord help the minutes." Maeve ignored him. "I saw that dog learn to eat again, like she was apologizing for being alive. I saw her flinch because somebody laughed too loud downstairs. I don't know contracts. I know soup. I know when a creature expects kindness to be followed by punishment." She looked toward Sterling, and her voice lost every trace of humor. No dog should have to apologize for surviving people. Abel stood next because, as he later claimed, sitting down after Maeve would have made him look emotionally available. He cleared his throat. "This town can be poor. Most towns are, one way or another. But if we've got to borrow honor from a dog and then throw her away when we're done using it, then we're poorer than our bank accounts ever managed to prove." He sat back down immediately, as if the pew had pulled him under. No one laughed. Not because it was not funny, because it was true. Nadine made one last attempt. She spoke of due process, admissibility, improper emotional influence, and the need to avoid public pressure. She was not wrong about process. That was what made her dangerous. She knew how to stand beside a rotten house and argue that demolition required the correct form. Colleen listened. Then she read the council's recommendation. Mara was to remain with Rowan Bell under the original handler return provision, pending formal civil review. County Animal Services would not remove her. The transfer from Hearthline to Whitcomb Crest would be referred for investigation. The allegations of misrepresentation, improper use of image, and abandonment would proceed through civil and county channels. There was no dramatic arrest, no handcuffs, no shattered confession. Sterling Whitcomb simply stood in a white church while the room changed how it looked at him. For a man who had lived on applause, that was its own cold sentence. Afterward, people did not rush Rowan. Perhaps they understood now that Mara did not need a crowd around her victory. They stepped aside instead, making a path down the aisle. Mara walked through it slowly. At the door, she paused. Snowlight poured around her. For one moment, the colors from the stained glass touched her coat, blue along the dark saddle of her back, red near the old scar at her neck, gold across the tag bearing her real name. Then she stepped outside. Weeks did not heal what months had broken, but they began. Rowan did not leave White Pine Hollow. At first he told himself it was because the civil review required him nearby, then because Mara needed consistency, then because the old Hearthline property needed repairs before winter deepened. Eventually, he stopped explaining it. Some answers did not need to be spoken before they became true. Vivian signed over what remained of the old facility's lease options and records. Lenora helped design a small treatment room. Evan reopened old reports, which made him unpopular with several people who preferred old mistakes stay asleep. Clara received a legal threat from Nadine and framed it above her desk for courage or spite. Maribel left Whitcomb Crest with 2 suitcases and moved into Maeve's spare room for a while, where Maeve informed her that rich people could learn to wash dishes like anyone else. Abel repaired the first kennel roof and complained through every nail. The new place did not look like redemption. Not yet. It looked like patched wood, frozen mud, donated heaters, second-hand blankets, and people too stubborn to quit while ashamed. A hand-painted sign leaned against the fence for 3 days because no one agreed whether it was level. Hearthline Winter Haven. Beneath it, Vivian added a smaller board. No living soul is a symbol first. Mara recovered the way winter leaves a field. Unevenly. She still hated applause. If someone dropped a pan, she woke hard and fast. She would not go near Red Ribbon. Some nights she slept by the door, head on her paws, guarding against a past that no longer knew the address. But there were mornings when she walked the fence line with Rowan as snow fell bright over the fields. Mornings when she sniffed the air and did not tremble. Mornings when she looked at Rowan not as if asking whether he would disappear, but as if assuming he would be there when she turned again. One clear morning, the first kennel was finished. Abel stood back with his hammer and frowned at the sign. "It's crooked." "It is not," Vivian said. "It's emotionally crooked." Lenora, checking a supply box nearby, said, "Abel, if you don't stop arguing with wood, I'm vaccinating you and the tow truck." Maeve arrived with coffee and announced that none of them knew how to run a sanctuary, which was why she had brought muffins. Rowan stood near the gate, one hand resting lightly at Mara's neck. The old military collar sat where it belonged. The metal tag had been cleaned, though not polished. Its scratches remained. Rowan preferred that. Some marks were not damage. Some were testimony. Mara leaned her head against his knee. Not heavily. Just enough. Rowan looked down at her. "Ready to go home?" Mara rose. She did not run ahead. She did not lag behind. She stepped beside him through the open gate, past the new sign, into the white morning. Not Liberty Bell, not disputed property. Not a ribboned story under chandelier light. Only Mara. A soul once unnamed by snow and silence, now walking under her own name again. Beside the man who had come late, stayed long, and learned that some promises are not kept by returning once. They are kept by remaining. Sometimes healing does not arrive like a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a name finally spoken with love, in a promise kept late but kept faithfully, in a wounded soul learning that not every hand will hurt. Mara's story reminds us that no life should be used, renamed, or forgotten just because it becomes inconvenient. And maybe, by God's grace, the small acts we choose each day, staying, telling the truth, offering kindness without applause, can become the beginning of someone else's way home. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories of loyalty, healing, and hope, consider subscribing to the channel. May peace find you gently, and may every forgotten promise in your life find its way back to grace.